So the guy who made Your Next, VHS, and The Guest made a Blair Witch sequel. I'm watching it right now. What? Hold on, guys. Sorry, hold on. He also made the Netflix live-action Death Note movie? So Blair Witch is the 2016 found footage horror film directed by Adam Wingard. It was written by Simon Barrett as a direct sequel to the first Blair Witch. So this movie completely ignores that horrible follow-up to the first Blair Witch known as Book of Shadows. So at least there's that, plus Adam Wingard is pretty great at directing horror. And of course the Blair Witch has amazing lore that goes back hundreds of years. They really took a lot of time and care when they created that first movie to make everyone think that it was a real story, so they created all of this lore in this town, which until this day has a ton of fans going and visiting the town just because of the Blair Witch film. So many visitors, in fact, that the farmer who owned the land where the old Blair Witch movie's house was had it destroyed because he was tired of people coming onto his property to take pictures. I gotta be honest, I always wanted a legit sequel to the first movie because obviously Book of Shadows wasn't it. There were a couple of games that were done, like the Rust and Parr game. They were pretty good. They actually expanded on the lore, but they never were like a real sequel. So we finally gotten it, but was it worth the wait? So the premise is James, the younger brother of Lisa from the first film, has never actually given up on his sister. He hopes that she's still alive somewhere out there in the woods, that she's lost or whatever, and he's dedicated his life to trying to go find her. So he grabs some of his friends, a bunch of cameras, and he sets out to make a documentary about trying to find his sister. But before they set out into the woods, they get a couple of locals to act as guides and to help them along the way. Now remember, in this film's universe, the first Blair Witch was real. That actually happened. The thing is, they never found the actual house where everything transpired at the end of the first film. So James and company's goal is to find the house and try to see if there are any signs of his sister. This movie not only stays true to the nature of found footage, but it does so with sometimes up to 7 or 8 cameras at once. And that's pretty impressive because most of it's done from the point of view of the actual characters, so they're only able to film these scenes 1 camera at a time, and then they have to edit them all together in post, which is massively time consuming. There are different types of cameras in the movie. You have a DSLR, you have these little ear cameras, and then you have an old DV camera. And I like the fact that they gave all 3 types of cameras a distinct look. They don't all look the same, they don't all sound the same. Everything is separate when it comes to the cameras. They really did well with blocking and having all of the actors in the shots, or when they're moving from one place to another, having the actors who are wearing helmets with the camera on it, usually an A7S, find certain key moments or things that the audience is supposed to see from their point of view as well. Now, from what I understand, one of the final shots in the movie, they did over 100 takes before they felt like it was just right. But there is one thing that drags that moment down, as well as many other moments in the film down, and that, of course, is the old trick that I talked about in The Taking of Deborah Logan that found footage films use, and that is glitches in the camera. They often use it to show, differences in time, or to cut stuff together, or to just add this atmosphere to make you feel like, oh, I'm watching found footage because the camera's messing up, so it must be. And on the build up to the big finale, it does use it a decent amount, but when things really start to happen and, things come together and it's getting to those big moments, they kind of back off of it and they let the images speak for themselves. So this found footage movie looks like a found footage movie, but does it sound like found footage? Not necessarily. The audio in this movie tends to sound pretty fantastic. That's because they had their big boom mics, overhead recording the audio for the dialogue. But in the movie, it's supposed to be the footage that you hear from these cameras. And these little ear cameras, I've seen them actually before in real life, and they kind of are garbage. You can tell there's a disparity in the movie between what the footage is, what the cameras are, and what the sound would be like. But I let that slide, and you should too, because, if you have a movie that looks great but has crap audio, you're really gonna hate it. You're not going to enjoy it. If you wanted to equate it to something, think about somebody making you this really pretty, delicious looking birthday cake, and you go to take a big bite and you're all excited, and then instead of using sugar, they use salt and it tastes like crap. So that's basically what they did here. Of course, the audio would have sounded like crap from these cameras. The girl using the Canon, she's not even using a Rode mic or anything. These little cameras on their ear definitely would have crap audio. And that DV camera would for sure sound like crap because not only is it like an older type mic, it's probably mono, but you have to then take that footage, convert it into digital form, and then edit it. I used to have to do that when I started doing my filmmaking, so I know how that can be. But they did reportedly spend about 5 weeks doing the audio mix and the sound design and everything else, and I think that shows in the film when it comes to, you know, these creature noises, and then the stuff that you hear off in the woods. You remember in the first one, you would hear like rocks and trees and people yelling and all that. That happens in this one, but they crank it up to 11. This being a found footage movie, there should be no music in it. And they didn't put music in the footage, but they did kind of cheat, and they used like these drones and different effects, trying to make it seem like it's the cameras making these sounds, but I didn't really buy it, and I was still sitting there like, that's music, man. Part of what made the original so effective was the fact that you didn't have music. You just had the quiet. You just had the wind and the leaves rustling and those sounds that they had people off camera making. And a lot of times they wouldn't even tell the actors when they were gonna do it. They would just do it, so their surprises were real surprises. Speaking of surprises, let's get to that spookiness, that world building. The film is pretty similar to the original in that, you know, it's about people who go out into the woods with their cameras trying to find out about this legend and see what happened. But there are some unique elements that weren't in the original. They may be kind of hinted at in the original, but they never overtly said what they were. Of course, they go a lot deeper into those elements for this one, but I don't want to say what they were because it would spoil. But at the same time, remember, in this universe, in this movie, the original film actually happened. Those people went out to make that documentary and they were never found again. So there are certain points in the movie where characters aren't taking things seriously, and I was sitting there like, wait, why would they be joking around or be, you know, so negative about things when they know this stuff happened before? Now, this crew obviously was much better prepared than the original. They had better camping gear, they had better cameras. One of them is a paramedic. There is a little exposition, but they use it in the form of conversation. So, you know, it comes naturally, because if you're out hiking in the woods, you're gonna talk to the other people that you're with. The production design of the movie definitely adds to that world building. Yes, they filmed in the actual forest, and they did build a house with certain parts of the set inside of it, so that looks pretty cool. But they did build a really huge set on a sound stage. It was like 3 stories tall, so they can get these really cool one-take shots. And they also built a couple new kind of sets for those elements that weren't in the original. But the thing is, like I said earlier, the original house was destroyed, so how did they reconstruct it? They actually went to all of these people's social media feeds. They looked at the pictures they took in and around that house before it got destroyed, and they use that to reconstruct the actual house, which is really cool. The sounds and the scares in this one, I think, are a bit more shocking and a bit more visceral than the original. The original was a bit more psychological. A lot of that was because of their budget, but in this one, obviously, they have a little bit better budget, they have better tech. There's a great balance between the usage of light and shadow to make things scarier during the night shots. And I like the fact that most of the time, the lighting is only a campfire or a couple flashlights, and they were able to do that because they had an A7S and they had a red, and both had speed boosters on them, so they were really great in low light. Between the shadows, the light, and the sound, they were able to craft a ton of jump scares. There are so many jump scares in this movie. Sometimes I was like, wow, that was a really good one. And a couple other times I was like, wait, why would you do a jump scare right there? Okay, I mean, it startled me, but it was cheap. It was that, or whatever. But what they were showing wasn't that scary. It was just another one to kind of be like, gotcha. Now, I'm not upset about it or mad about it. I'm not one of those snobs who's like, jump scares? I only want tension. I don't want to see anything. I only want atmosphere. No way. Sometimes I want the shit scared out of me. And, you know, I think it worked because here I am in my office at night by myself at 4 a.m. filming my review, and I had to stop filming a second ago because my battery died. So when I went out there to get the batteries, I thought I saw someone sitting in one of the chairs. It was just the curve of the chair from a weird angle through the glass in the office, but it still scared the out of me and made me jump. There are a couple moments of body horror in the movie. From what I understand, they wanted a lot more in the original script, but they felt like it might clash too much with how the original was presented, so they did leave some of them in here, and they're pretty good. Some of the scares aren't supernatural at all, you know, they use real practical stuff all through this movie. You know, there's a point where like a tree falls, and they actually made a giant tree fall. So if you're afraid of the woods, you're afraid of the dark, if you're claustrophobic, this movie is going to be pretty effective for you. Throughout the film, you get some glimpses of something in the woods. They never really say or show what it is. they kind of leave it up to your imagination, and I think that was a good choice. There are times where I felt like they should have at least put something within the frame where certain moments transpire, but they, left it up to the sound and the psychological effect and everything, and that works to a point. But sometimes you have to see like a hand or a head or some eyes or something to really drive that moment home. And like I said a minute ago, a lot of the scares and a lot of the stuff that you see is practical. It's in camera, it's stuff that they did on set, and I love that. Where I do think the movie falters a bit is the tension. Early on, all the way up until 40 minutes into it, there isn't a lot of tension, where the original just kept ratcheting it up little by little by little by little till it just got so overwhelming that people were freaking out. There were people who fainted in theaters. Now, of course, the build-up in this one wasn't so methodical. It was kind of intermittent. And I think what they were trying to do was to get you comfortable so that when stuff pops off, and it really does pop off at about 40 minutes till the end of the movie, it just goes hard all the way to the end. There's no let up at all. So if you are somebody who gets squeamish, who gets really scared, from horror movies and things, that last 40 minutes is really gonna kick your butt.
And now the moment we've all been waiting for is here. We're out of time.
It's Judgment Day.
There are some dumb decisions in this movie that are there to progress the plot and not really do much else. Stuff that, in the real world, somebody probably wouldn't do, and they are like tropes that you see in horror movies, especially found footage. They really stuck to their guns with the found footage. They didn't do anything that felt like it was from outside or whatever, like many of these films do. They stayed from, the perspective of the group all the way to the end. But one of my biggest issues with this movie are the rules. They say certain things that you can or can't do around the witch, or, if you find the place, what happens and everything. And they break their rules a couple times. Horror filmmakers, if you make rules, make sure you stick to them. If you get to a point where you're kind of written yourself into a corner, you need to either go back and change some stuff up, or you need to figure out a way to get out of that corner. You can't just say, well, I can't do anything about it, so I'm just gonna do this, because it's gonna stick out like a sore thumb. The movie did tread a lot of familiar ground from the first one and from many other found footage movies that have come since then, but I feel like if they had done more with that tension building and the build up to the big finale, I would have been able to forgive it more. So the movie's definitely better than Book of Shadows. It isn't as good as some found footage movies have been. It's still a pretty fun time, and that's why I'm giving Blair Witch a 6 out of 10.